Yeah, good evening. So we are at the fag end of the summit today, the last panel, and I can assure you it is going to be an interesting and an important one because we are going to talk about the new ideas to combat the climate challenge. Why this is important, as I invite my guests on the stage, I'll share that with you. So I have four of them today. The first one is Rajan Anandan, Managing Director, Sequoia Capital. Anybody who has been in the investment community, they call him the rock star. So we are happy to have you, Rajan, on the stage. Yeah, I think this one. Then let me invite Nadeem Shakir. He's the Regional Director, Transport and Future Mobility at Zutari, UAE. Zutari, sorry. Then let me invite Manzoor Khan, Managing Director, OMPECO, UAE. Now let me invite Stuart Fleming. He's the Managing Partner at Enviroserve Services based out of UAE as well. Okay, so we are going to talk about new ideas in combating climate challenge. So let me start by putting this thought in front of you. So far, what we have been used to in terms of the disruption and the technology development in fintech space has been either an app base or a SaaS base. If you see a problem, you create an application or you create a solution, you go to the market and you are up and running. But when you come and talk about climate, the dynamics are very different. The problems are more complex, the time to market is very long, and the risk profile is also very high. So in this case, first we would like to find out from you, Rajan, that how can we actually create an ecosystem which can allow the development of new ideas in climate when we are dealing with all these challenges of gestation and the complexities?
Yeah, thanks for having us. Great to be here. So I think, look, firstly, maybe take a step back and say climate today is many different industries, right? So everything from electric vehicles to new energy to storage to agriculture to food to recycling. Two of our panelists are from that space. I mean, so it's very broad. And I think what we're seeing in India, specifically focused on India, is the emergence of real IP-based innovation, right? Whether it's in the space of, let's say, recycling or agricultural biotechnology or new battery chemistries. And I think that's very important because, to your point, climate tech startups will look and feel very different. There'll be a small subset of them that are building software for enterprises to measure and manage their carbon emissions, but that's going to be a very small subset of what we're going to see. So the real breakthrough innovations, right? Tesla, arguably has more IP than the entire automotive industry combined, history to date. So these are going to be IP-driven companies, and I think what we're seeing now in India, which is very exciting, is IP-driven companies that are coming out of academic institutions, right? So whether it's IIT Chennai probably is is sort of leading this, but also we're seeing some of the other IITs and so on coming out of it. So just building on that, I think what you need now to build this ecosystem is, first and foremost, you need more ideas, right? So breakthrough IP-based disruptive, innovative ideas. So for instance, there was a panel, I think 2 panels ago, there was a discussion on green hydrogen.
Yes.
There are Indian startups now that are building membrane-less electrolyzers, right? Now that's pretty cool because there are only 3 companies in the world that do that. If you had asked me 3-4 years ago, are we going to see that in India? You don't know. So I think that's the first part. And I think there we need to have a lot more government as well as private sector money that should be invested in research, ideally in these leading academic research institutions, because that's where these sorts of innovations can happen. So that's one. I think the second is we need the best entrepreneurs to build businesses in these stages. And what we know about entrepreneurs is if they see a large opportunity where there's enough capital to be built, they will go after those problems, right? So I think clearly there's no question today that climate provides arguably the largest opportunity that we have over the next 20, 30 years. Now we need the capital. I think the second thing we need is the capital ecosystem needs to develop. I think we're now in the early days of the traditional venture capitalists, let's say like Sequoia or Prashant was here from Axel or others, who are now beginning to invest in climate companies. Karan from B Capital is here. But that is really the early stage capital, and at least my view is that over the next 2 or 3 years, if you want to raise $1 or $5 or $10 or $20 million, you'll be able to get that from the traditional venture ecosystem. However, most breakthrough climate companies, let's take new battery chemistries, or let's take clean, new proteins. I mean, these all require hundreds of millions of dollars of capex, and that is not going to come, I don't think, from traditional venture funds. And there, what we really need is, I think, more strategic dollars coming into India. So for instance, if you look at a company like Carbon Clean, which is an Indian founder who moved to the UK about 7-8 years ago, right? He's building this extraordinarily interesting, carbon capture company out of the UK. They just closed a $100 million round, which was led by Chevron and Chemex, right? So whether it's the large energy companies, the large cement companies, the large steel companies, the large automotive companies, I think we need to figure out a way to sort of get late-stage capital in large numbers, because we're going to need a large amount of it, which is much more patient. So I think that's so second is entrepreneurs, but they will come if you can actually, if there's ideas and there's capital. And the third is capital. So I'd say, in terms of what we need a lot more research to happen. We need many more entrepreneurs. But that, in my mind, that's the easiest problem to solve, because in India we have enough entrepreneurs who are very, very strong. And third, there is a genuine capital gap that we need to solve. And I'm not talking about building renewables plants at gigawatt scale, right? I'm talking about these sort of innovative new technologies that could lead to interesting companies.
Yeah, I think if I can understand correctly, change of mindset is required across the board. To really deal with the climate crisis in terms of coming up with new ideas. And also IP is very important over here, because you have to create a hardware which was not required in the other fintech and the other disruptions which were actually happening. So it's largely IP and hardware driven and long gestation. That means the capital requirement is completely different. So that's something which we need to really look at. So Nadeem, let me move to you, and you look at transportation, the future of transportation, and you have been working with different stakeholders in terms of creating a policy framework for the transportation. So Rajan talked about Tesla as a good example, and there's a lot of investment actually going in terms of building next generation of the green transportation. How does that innovation in transportation actually looks like to you?
Yeah, Nitin, thanks. As you mentioned, that I come from the transport planning background. I think we have been fortunate to develop the master plan for Dubai twice in the past. The most recent one is 2030 Dubai. I think when we look at the master plan at the city level, we also look from the 3 different angles, those master plan. We call it AST approach. AST is basically create an environment for the resident to avoid making use of the cars. That's A. S is basically create an alternate so that people can shift to other sustainable modes of transport, and the T is basically use of technology to enhance the efficiency of the current transport network. So again, talking about A, what exactly it means. A means how we can avoid people to use cars. That's the most important thing, and that is very relevant to this part of the world, because Middle East is developing, the cities over here are developing. There is a lot of potential for the economic and population growth. So the plan which we are developing, we are working with RT and other agencies, is basically we are looking into transit-oriented development. So rather than having those scattered developments, we want to put developments around the metro stations. We want to put the developments which are accessible towards public transport system. We are also looking into aspect like how we can reduce the trip lengths, because if you see in a city like Dubai, average travel time is about 40 minutes. Your trip length is more than 20 kilometers. How we can optimize that? So that is one, basically looking at the wider land use and working on a plan so that we can avoid people to make trips comprehended together with the policies. We're also working with policies like staggered working hours, flexible timings. We're working more policies where we can do carpooling, car sharing. So these are shared economic policies at the wider level. The second level is shift, which we call it S. S is how we create alternate mode of transport or alternate mode of energy so that we can create that shift from, if you see the current the private private transport, a car culture in Dubai and UAE is more than 80% of the people use car. How do we move that slowly from 80% and move them more towards public transport, into micro-mobility and other aspects? Then the third is T, the use of technology. And when we say the use of technology, we are talking about the new and innovative modes. I think Dubai, we already know, we have already tested flying taxis, we have already tested different autonomous spots and all those things. And the whole objective of that bringing into equation is so that we can enhance the efficiency of the transport network. And the UAE already has a vision to reach net zero by 2050. And these are all initiatives to reach that. In addition, there's also a plan of the UAE rail network, which all of us know is Etihad Rail. That is also going to comprehend. So again, it's not a single fold solution. There are multiple levels which are being targeted to meet the UAE 2050 net zero plan. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So just one more thing which I want to add to your transportation part is also the traffic management. That's where the software comes in. Because if we have a great traffic management in the city, you can actually cut down a lot of emission and a lot of travel time. That is again a good example of what Rajan was talking about. Some element of software actually has to come in, because those are the things which, broader things people need to look at rather than one or two key things. So, thanks a lot for that input, how transportation future is going to look like. Now, let me move to Manzoor, to you.
Yeah, sure.
Very interesting part which I always feel strongly about is that, we had e-waste, okay? Now we are talking about the S-waste or the G-waste, the green waste, coming on back of the batteries, coming on back of the solar panels, which not many people are actually talking about, because that ends up into the landfill.
Yeah.
You and Stuart actually focus on this aspect of climate solution, which not many people talk about. That is another reason why I feel this panel is quite interesting, because we're bringing that element which not many people consider as the green part. So how do we actually, what are you doing to solve the problem of landfill? Because this amount of e-waste and the G-waste is going to keep increasing.
Yeah. Listen, thank you, Nitin. Excited to be here to share zero landfill solution, yeah, so which is very sustainable. So the solution what we talk about is a converter, where it's a zero landfill solution and you're treating waste on site. Yeah, it's very important where to understand that, like, whatever waste you create goes up into the landfill, right? In UAE, if you talk about, or in Dubai, there are 6 landfills, and it's just adding up a lot of waste and garbage on daily basis, basically. So Dubai alone produces around 7,000 tons of garbage every day. All this goes and sits into the landfill, basically. Yes, everybody talks about the segregation, but when you do the segregation, basically, only 20% of segregated waste goes back into recycling. 80% goes back into landfill. So it's a very, very important, because we at OMPECO have been in Europe for almost 20 years now, and last 15 years we've been using this technology in Europe. First 10 years is in the military, because in the military is where all these technologies are tested, proven, and then it goes into commercial use, basically. So with the experience of that, we've just come into UAE. The first thing we did was meet all the regulators. We met the municipalities, Ministry of Environment, everything. So our solution is where you no need to segregate any of garbage. You put everything into a machine called converter. It takes a 7 steps process, and within 30 minutes, the outcome is called RDF, refuse derived fuel, or the fluff. So this is used as raw material in the cement factory. So I think, like in UAE, when we talk about it, as UAE has been growing, Dubai has been growing, the landfills are filling up. The solution what we have, we can contribute in a small way back into preventing those garbage going into the landfill. That's where we are.
Yeah. Imagine what you could do in India if you had this.
Yes,
I live in Delhi, I was just telling you, we have mountains of waste.
It's a good thought, actually, like,
you should move the whole company there.
No,
exactly where you should be headquartered.
Definitely look forward to, because
you can probably supply the whole world's supply of this chemical.
Wish we could handle that. So the good thing is, right, it can handle around 50 kilos of waste per hour, and can go up to 2,000 kilos an hour.
Amazing.
So we have a domestic ones where you can use it in small buildings and go up to an industrial one. So when we meet all the regulators, they're very excited about it. It's a very simple technology. The machine can run up to 20 hours basically. So it's 30 hours of, like 30 minutes of processing and 30 minutes of cooling down. So we've been running this technology or live use cases in 25 countries, and it does all organic as well as the medical waste.
Yeah. So, and also I think it has a human element to it, which I'll come back to you later on that. So, Stuart, I think from your side, you know, you're also in the zero landfill solution, and you know, you talk about no smoke, no heat, no chemical, and zero emission. So that's a very interesting concept because it's a very dream concept which you know we want to see across the board. What is that all about?
Yeah, when I founded the company in 2004, it was the objective was a lot of people talk about environment. Let's talk about this, let's talk about it, but nobody was actually doing anything. So when I founded the company, it was obviously to progress towards what we have built 4 years ago, which is a treatment facility. Recycling is recycling. And there's great formal and informal recycling in India. Works great. It's one of the leading examples that I think globally people should look at is the informal and the formal recycling process in India. But what the world needs more is treatment facilities. Treatment facility just takes that recycling one step further, which is what we are here in the UAE and in throughout Middle East Africa operations, is taking it back to its raw material to then ensure that the value is retained within that country. Yeah. Whether it be India, the UAE, Kenya, wherever it might be, we're retaining the value there of that metal to go back into remanufacturing. So we're purely e-waste, and it's wonderful to be here as regards, I see technology as the driver for combating climate change. With technology comes hardware. With that hardware comes a life cycle, and we have to globally be aware and be prepared for the treatment of all this e-waste that is going to come from technology.
Yeah. You know, I think from the morning we have been a lot of discussion around, I don't know what you guys actually feel. One part we always missed is change of human behavior, because that is something, a very important element in terms of solving the climate issues which we have. Because we always talked about how to actually cure it, but without changing the behavior.
Like a classic example of that is Rwanda. It's a very small country in the middle of Africa, and they banned plastic bags 22 years ago before Sweden.
Yeah.
And they have, we have a facility in Rwanda, but it's a mindset change. The President Kagame changed the mindset by every fourth week, Saturday, putting in a program whereby everybody between 8 and 10 had to go outside and clean up. Yeah. And that made the mind change and the mindset. And you go there now, there's not one sweetie, wrapper, cigarette packet anywhere in 60 kilometers from Kigali. So you've got to change the mindset.
I think it's an interesting point you said about, like, you know, the human behavior, right? What we've seen from the statistics or data is in UAE, per person, there's 2 kilos of waste generated every day. Whereas in Europe, it's around 900 grams or so on, basically. So I think, like, educate, right? Once we start working towards, that's what when we are talking about calculating waste, right? Even though it's the same population, let's say example, right? UAE produces the double amount of waste, basically. So I think the ban of plastic and these kind of initiatives definitely is driving for something which you can reduce and contribute back into the landfills, basically.
Yeah. Before I come to Rajan for your closing remark. So one thing, Nadeem, from your perspective in the terms of the transportation part, one is, you know, having the e-buses, you know, the micro vehicles and all that. The other is basically, of course, the consumer behavior and also the infrastructure. That's where, you know, the government gets involved, and that's where the investments are very high. So how do you think that many countries who doesn't have access to resource can solve? You could actually create the e-buses, but if you don't have the right infrastructure.
Yeah, again, before I answer your question, I just want to answer this question on the human behavior, a very good example. Because back in 2003, we were developing the 2020 master plan for Dubai. Okay, in that master plan, we proposed 150 kilometers of the rail network. Okay, and there was a lot of objections from people inside that in this part of the world, nobody is going to use metro. This is a different environment, different. But we did create that, and now you can see if you go to Dubai Metro, it's a 75 kilometers already implemented, and it's already full during the peak hour. So you cannot really force the human behavior, but if you provide alternative, obviously you'll see the shift happening. And this is what is really required, not in transport, in every field. If you provide them a good alternate, solution, obviously they will shift. So coming back to the transportation, you said that infrastructure. I would see this in a different way because I come from an urban planning and transport planning background. Sometimes providing more infrastructure is more hazardous than providing less, because the moment you provide more roads, basically you are inviting more cars to be on it. Okay, so I think the cities where there is not much investment opportunities on all those things, I think our recommendation was always to invest into public transport and invest into micro-mobility. Micro-mobility is easy. My e-scooter doesn't really require a big infrastructure. You can just create some path on the footpath and have the e-mobility running in. And also for the cities where you have got not big investment, you can optimize the whole urban planning system so that you can create self-sustained communities so that people don't have to go outside their development to work. But there are a lot of solutions which can be developed for those kind of cities. But again, I think in this part of the world, since there is a big infrastructure already exists, it's very difficult to move people from the car to the public transport. That's why we need very enhanced and very optimized public transport and very futuristic transport and mobility networks. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a very good point on the infrastructure, which you talked about. So, Rajan, coming to you for your closing remarks, we heard about landfill. It's something which people do not fancy. Not many people focus on. Try to create, new solutions to it. And there are a lot of similar, issues like that. But that is also a big part of solving the climate, not just the carbon. So the world is just obsessed with carbon when we talk about climate. So how do we get the people in the VC industry, people who are funding, who are supporting, to change their mindset so that they can start thinking and seeing beyond carbon just to solve the climate crisis?
Yeah, I think, look, firstly, I think we're now getting to a point where green is green. What do I mean by that? Green technologies actually build viable economic businesses without subsidies, right? If you look at renewables, I was at COP and I didn't know this, but in Saudi Arabia today, solar costs less than fossil, right? So why is solar taking off around the world? Because, without subsidies, it's actually more affordable than fossil, right? So I think what we're getting to now is, in many sectors, right? Not just in renewables, electric vehicles, right? I think EVH, commercial trucks, two-wheelers, commercial two-wheelers, three-wheelers, commercial trucks, etc. Either we are already there or we'll get there very soon. So today, if you are in a commercial two-wheeler business or a commercial three-wheeler business in India, if you have a certain kilometer range per day, actually it's more economical on a TCO basis than buying a traditional two-wheeler or a three-wheeler, right? So I think across these markets, so for instance, my view on, let's take alternate proteins, right? Americans love beef. They're not going to eat Beyond Meat and whatever other brands if it's going to be priced at 60 to 70% premium. But when alternate proteins taste almost exactly the same, and today it's pretty good, but at the same price, at the grocery shelf, I think you'll start beginning to see. And then where it gets really interesting is when it actually gets to be more affordable than beef, right? So I think these things that get to this point, that's the first thing, right? Like at the end of the day, venture capital is a green business.
Yeah.
It's the second part of the green. Green is green, right? So as we start seeing entrepreneurs who are, look, at the end of the day, what is venture capital? Venture capital is we want to find extraordinary entrepreneurs who are going after very large markets, who, if they get it right, will end up building big businesses. Now, with many types of climate businesses, there is more technology risk, there is more regulatory risk, they take much longer to build, and it's hardware, right? Which means, like, as the EVH founder was telling me this morning, you have to build something. You have to have factories, and most of these factories are going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So all of that is very different. And I think, but if the outcome is large, Tesla was a $1 trillion company, right? So as venture capitalists, we look at something and say, okay, if you solve the world's, landfill problem, I mean, that's $1 trillion problem. That's $1 trillion problem. So I think you'll start seeing capital flow into it because, and it's all a matter of, like timing is everything, right? And I think the time has come because green is green.
Yes.
And I think that gets us all excited.
No, I think we are all excited that the world is going to look beyond carbon to solve the climate problem and also to start funding that. What we need, as you said about Tesla, in each of the segments, we need a rock star which people can actually look up to and get inspired. And that also invite a lot of investment and the VCs coming in. And that's where new innovation will also happen. So on that note, we are done with our 20 minutes of allocated time. But I thought we managed to cover quite a bit of ground to really figure out how we should actually look at new ideas beyond carbon and how we should actually support that from the funding perspective. So thanks a lot for your time and your insight. And thanks to everybody who stayed back to listen to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us here today. That wraps our Climate, Finance and Technology Summit that we've held here today at the Abu Dhabi Global Market. It's been a real pleasure for me to be with you here, looking at the insights of how the climate finance space is developing and accelerating. From COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh to COP28 next year here in the UAE. We looked at what was achieved, where the holes still are, where the challenges are in funding the transition, fueling the transition. We looked from the circular economy to the role of the private sector and heard a strong call for more clarity from government on the measurement of impact. Really interesting to hear about the startups and the new ideas coming through. Our thanks very much to you here in the physical audience, as well as those who have been watching online from around the world. A very special thanks to our sponsor today, Ola, and our hosts, the ADGM. It's been a pleasure for me to be with you. And of course, India Global Week and India Global Forum continues for the rest of the week here in the UAE. Thank you so much.